It took 25 years to solve this chilling story. An American university student left a party and vanished without a trace. From the very first days, the police had a suspect, but they couldn't prove his guilt. Only decades later did a podcast host uncover gruesome details of the case, bring it to the attention of millions, and force the police to reopen the investigation. Kristin Smart was born on February 20th, 1977, in Augsburg, Germany, but moved to the USA with her parents, brother, and sister in early childhood. The family settled in Stockton, California. Her parents worked as teachers for the children of American military personnel. After graduating from high school in 1996, Kristin enrolled at California Polytechnic State University. In her free time, she worked as a lifeguard at the campus recreation center. On May 25th of that year, a big birthday party was planned at a fraternity house for one of the students. Kristin planned to go, but her friends backed out. So, the young woman went to the fraternity house alone. The party was typical for American students. A large group drinking alcohol, listening to music, and having a good time. That evening, Kristin had too much to drink, felt unwell, and headed back to her dorm around 2 a.m. However, she could barely walk on her own. Noticing her on the street, two other students, Cheryl Anderson and Tim Davis, decided to walk her home. They had both been at the party. After a while, another student, who had also been at the party, Paul Flores, joined them. He offered to walk Kristin to her dorm, as he lived the closest. Cheryl and Tim, who needed to go in a different direction, said their goodbyes and left. No one has seen Kristin alive since. At first, her disappearance wasn't taken seriously. Kristin's roommate, Margarita Campos, was the first to worry. She was sure her friend would return home after the party, but it never happened. Adding to the anxiety was the fact that all of Kristin's belongings, including her passport, wallet, and bank card, were left in the room. This meant she couldn't have just up and left. Margarita reported Kristin missing to the campus police only 2 days after her disappearance, apparently hoping until the last moment that Kristin was fine. However, the campus police didn't take the report seriously. It was a holiday weekend, followed by Memorial Day, a national holiday honoring fallen American soldiers. The local police simply assumed Kristin had gone home and weren't bothered by the fact that she had left all her important belongings and documents in her dorm. It's also worth noting that it was a 7-hour drive from the university campus to Kristin's family home. Too far to suddenly embark on such a journey without money or documents, especially in the middle of the night. A few days later, the local police finally decided to do some work and called the young woman's parents. Kristin's mother reported that her daughter hadn't come home in a long time and hadn't called in recent days. This call worried the mother, and the parents went to the police. But even there, the police were reluctant to open an investigation. They stated that not much time had passed since Kristin's disappearance, and she could have just been out with friends. The search began only on the 4th day after she went missing. At first, volunteers searched for her, but the searches yielded no results. The first thing the police did was question Paul Flores, who had offered to walk Kristin to her dorm and was supposed to be the last person to see her. He told detectives that he and Kristin walked to her dorm, said goodbye, and she went to her room alone. He claimed he went straight to bed afterward, but inconsistencies in his story were quickly found. Paul's dorm mates saw him go to the shower around 5 a.m., whereas he and Kristin had parted ways after 2 a.m. Furthermore, he had a black eye and scratches on his knees. When asked by several people, he gave 3 different stories about how he got these injuries. Paul Flores looked extremely suspicious, but there was no direct evidence against him. A month had passed since Kristin's disappearance, and the police expanded the search area to her hometown. There, journalists sensationalized the case, drawing parallels between the story and the plot of the popular TV series Twin Peaks. The news even mentioned psychics who claimed to have already solved the case. According to them, the young woman was killed by two men on campus, then taken to a cliff and thrown into the water. Of course, these claims were of no use to the police. A year after Kristin's disappearance, her parents filed a lawsuit against Flores, accusing him of involvement in their daughter's disappearance. In 1997, Paul testified under oath but only answered one question when asked to state his name. In all other instances, he invoked the Fifth Amendment, which allows an accused person not to testify against themselves. Afterward, Paul's parents sued Kristin's family, accusing them of inflicting emotional distress. But both of these lawsuits led to nothing. The police had no evidence to hold Paul accountable. On May 25, 2002, on the 6th anniversary of Kristin's disappearance, authorities officially declared her dead. In all that time, they had not come any closer to solving the case. This continued until 2018, when California resident Chris Lambert decided to launch his own podcast series dedicated to various crimes. At the time of Kristin's disappearance, he was 8 years old and remembered the chilling story from the news. 22 years later, he decided to conduct his own investigation and was amazed at how negligently the police had worked all this time. First, Chris decided to talk to all the witnesses from that time. From university students, he learned that Paul Flores had a bad reputation. The young man had repeatedly harassed female students, but it never led to official complaints. Next, Chris analyzed the police's actions and concluded that they had made several critical errors. Detectives went to the home of Paul's father, Ruben Flores, only 2 months after the young woman's disappearance. Given that Paul lived with his father, the police should have searched the residence immediately. But when the police finally did conduct a search, it was done extremely carelessly. Detectives didn't bring forensic experts or cadaver dogs trained to detect the scent of decomposition. Because of this, the search was essentially useless. The detectives also failed to inspect the Flores family's 2 cars, one of which Paul could have used to take Kristin from the campus to his father's house. A few months after the police visit, one of the cars was sold, and the other was allegedly stolen. The police never even went to Paul's mother's house, where one of the most important clues was hidden. Chris Lambert found out that 4 months after Kristin's disappearance, a woman named Mary Lassiter rented Paul's mother's house. In one of the rooms, she found an earring that looked very similar to a necklace Kristin was wearing at the time of her disappearance. This necklace was also in the photos of the young woman posted on billboards throughout the county. Mary noticed the similarity and took the earring to the police. And what do you think happened? The police first refused to add the evidence to the case file and later lost the earring altogether. But what Chris found out next is truly shocking. The yard at Paul's mother's house had always been covered in concrete. However, shortly after Kristin's disappearance, a piece of concrete was cut out and a flower bed was planted there. This already seems strange, but it gets more interesting. Mary Lassiter, who rented the house, told Chris a very chilling fact. For a while after moving in, every day at 4:20 a.m. and 4:20 p.m., she would hear a sound resembling an alarm from a digital wristwatch. The sound came from the backyard, directly from under that very flower bed. One day, the sound stopped. Either the watch's battery died, or it was dug up and moved. Chris Lambert went to Kristin's mother to tell her about this. Upon hearing the story about the alarm, the woman was speechless with shock and couldn't say a word for several minutes. Then she finally said that Kristin always set her alarm for 4:20 a.m. because she had to be at work at the campus recreation center by 5 a.m. When Lambert's podcast aired in 2019, it was listened to by over 6 million people. The public was shocked that the police had been inactive all this time, allowing a murderer to live freely. The new leads that Chris dug up only intensified the outrage. As a result, the police department decided to take on the case again, And this time, more than 20 years later, they did their job properly. They conducted searches in 4 locations, including Paul Flores' home. At first, the police only reported that they had found evidence of interest to the investigation. On January 29, 2020, law enforcement announced that they had seized 2 of Paul's cars as evidence. It later became known that they had finally excavated the yard at Paul's mother's house. But Kristin's body was not there. However, the police assured that they had obtained evidence that traces of human decomposition were indeed present under the flower bed. On February 11, 2021, news broke that Paul Flores had been arrested, but the reason was not Kristin's disappearance at all, but possession of an unregistered firearm. On March 15th, a judge issued a search warrant for his father's house, and on April 13th, the father and son were taken into custody in connection with Kristin's disappearance. The court charged Paul with murder and his father with being an accessory. According to the investigation's theory, when Paul and Kristin were alone, he started harassing her, but was rebuffed. This explains the origin of the scratches and bruises. In the struggle, Paul could have killed Kristin, then put her in a car and taken her to the house. Then he and his father buried the body in his mother's backyard and disguised the spot as a flower bed. After some time, they decided to dig up the remains and move them to an unknown location. The father and son pleaded not guilty, and the trial is still ongoing. However, with such a collection of facts and evidence, it is unlikely they will be able to avoid punishment, even though justice has been delayed for a long 25 years. Kristin's parents made a public statement thanking Chris Lambert and the millions of compassionate people who, through their joint efforts, were able to get to the truth. Now all that remains is to wait for the trial to end and for the criminals to receive their punishment. Subscribe to the channel to listen to these real and scary stories. Sometimes these stories end well, but more often badly. It's disturbing.